In this video, we're going to move on to the founding of the Roman Republic. The Roman monarchy fell in 509. We have, again, legends, not contemporary accounts, that report that the Romans drove out the last of the Etruscan kings because his son had raped a Roman virgin. So it's important to recognize this isn't a revolution in the way that we have revolutions in modern history. It's like overthrow the king is evil and oppressive, and we want freedom and we want to radically change our society. The Romans actually want to preserve the traditional values of their society, and that's why they're getting rid of the kings. And so, again, we don't know how accurate these legends are, but it's definitely the case that we see a pattern of a transition from a government by a monarchy to government by an aristocracy when we look at the Greek city-states. And it's important to remember that this is how the Romans wanted to be remembered. So they wanted to be remembered for founding their republic in order to defend these traditional values, family values, if you will. The early republic was very aristocratic. It was basically governed by the patricians who made up the Senate. No office was held by just a single person, except for a dictator who was appointed in times of emergency. It's basically like granting the President of the United States emergency powers, and the dictator could serve no longer than 6 months. So once you hit 6 months, you can't call it a state of emergency anymore. Power has to be returned to the government. The office of the king was replaced by 2 consuls who held office for a single year, and they held the powers now of imperium and auspicium. They oversaw justice, and they worked with the office of the quaestor, and the quaestors enforced the law on behalf of the consuls. The Senate was expanded to 300 members who would serve for life and would be the main governing body of Rome, and new senators were appointed by the consuls. Most of the population in the Roman Republic were citizens, and they had the basic rights of citizens in this society. They could do business, they could get married, they could vote, and they could run for public office. These last two, of course, are restricted depending which class you fall into as to what type of public office and what type of vote you can exercise. The Romans were organized into 3 tribes based on the culture they claimed to be descended from. The descendants of Romulus, those who considered themselves Italians, and those who considered themselves Etruscans. So it's re-emphasizing the multicultural nature of Rome, that the Romans are recognizing that they come from different backgrounds, but they're also acknowledging that these different backgrounds can be fused together into a single republic. Each tribe consisted of 10 clans, and each clan had its own assembly. And so the clans together make up what's known as the Curiate Assembly. And the Curiate Assembly had to authorize and approve motions passed by the Senate. So it's not as though the patricians are totally ruling over the city. There is a second house that provides a check and balance. So this is kind of the house of the people. Nevertheless, of course, people in the Senate had a lot of influence. If you were the patron of a number of your clients were in the Curiate Assembly, you could probably exercise a lot of influence on how they voted. Move on now to the next slide. We'll see that the early years of the Republic are characterized by efforts of the plebeians to expand the rights and opportunities they had in the Republic. And eventually they're going to be successful. We're going to spend most of the rest of this class charting this success. This success is remarkable for a number of reasons. First, it reveals that the Romans are pragmatic and flexible, not ideological. They're willing to change their system of government in order to make the Republic work. And this is totally different from the Greeks, remember, who identify their place, their home, their identity, who they are with a particular type of government. We're Spartans, we have a monarchy, we're Athenians, we have democracy. The Romans are much more open to changes and much more flexible. What's also remarkable is that this great change was achieved peacefully and was achieved while the Romans remained united against outsiders. So especially when we get into the 20th century, the influence of Marxism, we're going to see a common train of thought that says that change that's necessary to increase the amount of rights that a certain sector of the population holds cannot be achieved without violence. But to be honest, the Romans basically did. They achieved this great change in their society, this evolution into a society where plebeians and patricians had a much more equal status, and they did it peacefully. So it shows that peaceful change is possible. Peaceful, substantial change is possible in a society. After about the year 500, the Romans typically permitted the wealthiest plebeians to serve in the army. Again, this is kind of a gateway into enjoying political responsibilities. If you're willing to serve in the army, and you're willing to put your body on the line, then you can hold more extensive rights in this society. And so when the Romans conduct their first reform, they grant citizens more power and more access based on wealth. So this is more like an oligarchy. So we have equestrians, we have 3 classes under the equestrians. Where you fall determines the amount of wealth you can provide, the amount of wealth that you could provide towards fitting yourself out as a soldier. So those who can pay for others to be soldiers have a lot of prestige. Those who can't outfit themselves have limited influence. The plebeians form their own assembly called the Council of the Plebs, which is based on where people live. So it's kind of a more universal assembly. Everyone can be part of it. Initially, their laws are only binding on the plebeians and have to be ratified by the Senate in order to become law. So these laws don't apply to the patricians. Eventually, again, the plebeians start to elect their own representatives in the Senate. These representatives are called tribunes. They have the authority to veto any bill in the Senate that they thought went against plebeian interests. So you can see how plebeian influence in the way Rome is making decisions is increasing. We get into the 5th century, we find that again in a process similar to Athens, the laws are being written down. So now you know exactly what the laws are. The laws don't have to be interpreted by a judge according to custom or tradition, but everyone knows what the laws are. The laws can be applied universally. At points during this process, we find that the plebeians are dissatisfied with the lack of progress, or they're dissatisfied with the lack of representation they have. They threaten to rebel, to go on strike, to secede. They do all of these things at various points. Never a full-on rebellion, though. And the patricians know that they need the plebeians to work with them. They need the plebeians to fight the wars of Rome and to defend the city, and so the patricians are willing to make compromises. But the plebeians respect the continuity that the patricians provide. Again, Rome is a very conservative society. So it's not as though the plebeians are going to go in there and demand radical reforms. But the reforms that the Romans are carrying out are incremental, small steps, but they're substantial. And so we start to see as we move further on that the Council of the Plebs is now allowed to appoint 2 aedles, and the aedles oversee the business of the Republic. So what kind of market regulations are being enacted? So the plebs start to have an influence there. If we move on to the next slide, there's a period during which the Romans removed the office of consul and instead they developed the office of military tribune. They don't want the plebs to have the ability to become consuls, and so they elect these military tribunes who hold the military power of a consul but not the religious power. And so they kind of split the office between these military tribunes and these other officers in terms of controlling the judiciary, in terms of carrying out religious duties. These are held by officials called censors. If we move on to the next slide, the last slide, as the years go by, the number of plebeians who are wealthy, who are becoming members of the Senate is growing. The plebeian class as a whole is becoming more wealthy through trade. and eventually the Romans and the Senate are comfortable in passing laws that allow first restore the consulate, so we have consuls again, then allows for one of the consuls each year to be a plebeian, and then in 287 we have the Hortensian Law that makes any laws passed by the Council of the Plebeians binding on all Romans without ratification from the Senate. And so we've seen this evolution from Rome, from a monarchy to an aristocracy, where all power, or almost all power, is held by the patricians, to an oligarchy, where power is mostly determined by wealth, to a society that has a much more even distribution of power. And again, the Romans have a great belief in peaceful government reform and in establishing a rule of law to which all members of society were subject. And this is going to make the Romans unique in the ancient world. This ability to reform through the legal process rather than through violence or conquest. And so this is going to be the great Roman contribution to Western civilization, the idea of development and improvement through legal reforms. So here's your introduction to the foundations of Rome, and I'll see you next week to talk about some war and some campaigns.